East Texas. This is Adam Morrow with Express Employment Professionals, and we're following up on the East Texas Employment Survey luncheon that was held on May 29th. We had many of you were there at Holly Tree when we talked about a survey of local businesses about employment trends. And many of you said, hey, we want an opportunity to go deeper. And so I'm very excited today. We're at the office of Mike Taliaferro. Mike, thanks so much for being here with us.
Thank you, Adam.
And we asked people that attended that luncheon, what else would you want to know? And the number one person they wanted to know more about and what they were saying, Mike, was what you had to say. So let me just review that real quick. We one of the questions that we asked on our survey had to do with drug screens. We just asked, hey, what's your experience with drug screens? How many passed? And the answer was almost half, 46.3%, say we don't even test. And so we had an opportunity to talk with you, Mike, and really the angle that you had the opportunity to address was really just had to do with that, among other barriers to employment. And you mentioned one of the avenues that you've learned about and that you offer is a program called Bridges of Poverty. And so many people said, hey, I want to know more about that. So can you, in a nutshell, tell us a little bit more about Bridges of Poverty?
And thank you for the opportunity. Bridges Out of Poverty is actually a strategy. It's a strategy to look at different economic classes through their lenses. And you look at it through the prism of hidden rules of different socioeconomic classes, sometimes language, where we use formal register a lot of times. People in poverty may use casual register. We look at through resources or lack of, and we look at a prism maybe of I would say just the cultural difference between socioeconomic classes. And so looking at those different prisms, you can look through each other's lens to see what are the differences in how somebody's world is relative in that socioeconomic class, and how at some point, either at social services or employment, we ask those different socioeconomic groups to merge, basically interface, if you will. And so not understanding how those different socioeconomic classes function, not understanding their hidden rules, possibly language register, a lot of times we can have judgment set in. And once we have judgment set in, then there's no relationship building.
Okay. So this is a strategy that helps people understand the lenses through which other socioeconomic levels understand the world.
Yes,
is that right?
It is. Because in these socioeconomic groups, there's norms. And sometimes we like to call those hidden rules. And one of the most basic, simplest ones I usually can start off with in the training is who controls the channel changer at your house. Mm-hmm. And you don't even have to have a sign on the wall for your family to know who controls the channel changer or when friends come over. And the same is true in every socioeconomic class. There are hidden rules and norms that are just hidden cues and things that we were raised with. None are right or wrong. It's just the ones that we're raised with. And so people in poverty class have those certain sets of rules and norms. So does middle class and so does wealth class. And a lot of times when we run into those, and it's a hidden rule or a norm that we don't agree with, then that's when, again, we can judge or we can question somebody's, motive or somebody's doing that. And when that happens, then that really slows down relationships. And once judgment starts, sometimes stereotyping begins. And again, it all just kind of funnels up to or down to we're not building relationships.
Wow. So there's some really significant stuff in here that I know we could, you do a whole weekend training on this, but I want to hit a couple things that you said. One is, there's an opportunity for many of us to understand these lenses. How does somebody begin to do that?
The best way to begin to do it is obviously take a Bridges class.
Sure.
But if you want to do it on your own, just to kind of test it out, is just take a piece of paper or a dry erase board and draw a circle and put, say, poverty above it, and make a mental model. And ask yourself, what do I think people in poverty do every day? How do they spend their time? What is their day like? And so when you make that mental model, you'll be surprised at what you put down, and some of it will come from your generational raising. Some may come from your stereotypical thinking. Some may come from experience. Then do the same thing for the socioeconomic class that you're in. And then what you'll see is that there's really a big difference between those lenses, that person in poverty and that person in middle class. And one of the most basic ones are, for what are the drivers, or, for middle class, it's achievement. Mm-hmm. For poverty class, it's survival. And so it's really hard for us to merge those two together when somebody's trying to survive. Yet as an employer, we're wanting people to achieve, wanting to climb a ladder, etc. And that's hard to do. So when you look through, make those mental models, you can start seeing that there's differences between the worlds, the two relative worlds. And so if I look through that other relative world's lens, I can understand now and see why some things are happening and why they're making some of the decisions that they're making. Mm-hmm. And I might even be challenged with a lot of those questions or those decision points, And so I need them also to look through the lens of middle class sometimes, or wealth class, to see, why do I need to be to work on time? Mm-hmm. Why do I need here? And so that's why Bridges is a prism that looks both ways, and it's called Bridges because it goes both ways. Mm. We need all classes to look together at each other and understand the three different relative worlds that we have.
Mm. And so one thing I want to go back to, I think you said it a minute ago, but you also said it at the luncheon. Mm-hmm. There's no significant learning without a significant relationship. So can you unpack that for us?
I can, especially in the socioeconomic class of poverty. There's a lot of things that are available for people in poverty. And sometimes they're very familiar with them and sometimes not. But most of those things that are available come from a middle class perspective and middle class norms. And so when we give them those potential tools or what have you, we take for granted that they still don't have tyranny in their life, that person doesn't have maybe a car that won't start. They're behind on a water bill, maybe they just got their electricity cut off. And so our expectation, though, is that they would we want them to learn these things and then apply the things we're trying to teach them. But unless they have a significant relationship with somebody that understands their daily struggle and the tyranny they're going through, one, they don't have the opportunity to learn, and two, they don't have that influence to, why should I learn this when I'm trying to survive? So without that significant relationship, then it's just really hard for them to be able to devote time for that. A lot of people, in the socioeconomic class of poverty work 15, 16, 18 hours a day. Some work multiple jobs. And so they have a family also. When would they have the time and stuff to learn these things? Without that significant person to help explain to them and help mentor them into, how is this beneficial to you? How does this, help advance you? Then it's just something they're not going to take the time to do because they have other tyranny that they have to take care of.
So if I'm tracking with you, understanding can lead to relationship, and then relationship can lead to something else, learning or whatever, met needs that are true.
Once you understand why people make the decisions that they make and what those drivers are and their norms and hidden rules that guide them, then you replace judgment with curiosity, and that curiosity then turns into a relationship. And with that relationship then becomes, opportunity for advice, opportunity for, counseling, etc., that they will actually take. Because for people, especially in the socioeconomic class of poverty, trust is a big issue, and they don't give it easily. And so you have to earn and gain that trust. And empathy, sympathy, and compassion do not equal trust. And so that has to be earned, but you can't judge. When you come from a socioeconomic group where nonverbal gesture is used 75-80% of the time, and you use casual register, which is usually a 400 to 800 word vocabulary, then an eye roll, a shoulder shrug, or your body posture can turn a person off in about 2 seconds, because that's what they pick up on. That's their relative world. And so unless you're willing and go to that extent to want to understand and want to not have judgment, then it's going to be really hard to ever build that relationship. and to really get to that point to where they trust you. Because at some point, they may need to disconnect from a relationship that's not good for them, but they need it to survive. Or they may need to disconnect from an area or from a parent. But if your relationship isn't stronger or as strong as theirs, then they're not going to take that advice. But you may need them to disconnect from that for some time to be able to make the changes that will help get them or keep them out of poverty.
So, and I can totally identify with this. I'm thinking, in my role as a business person, in the world, my everyday world, I'm busy at work. I go home to my family, and I don't always encounter very, very frequently at all somebody that might be in a poverty situation. And if I do, I would expect them, I would make some assumptions about that they would understand things the way I do. Can you, maybe it's by way of illustration, do you have any maybe favorite stories about people not understanding those worldviews?
I'll tell you.
I
I do, and I'll tell you one that was real life happened to me. And every year here in Tyler, we do the annual point in time homeless survey. We do it. I think it's the third Thursday of every January, and it's done across the nation. So the first year I did it, I pretty much had in my mind and in my stereotypical thinking what I was going to run into when I went and did the first survey. So we go down to the homeless encampment, and had my clipboard in hand. I walked up to this guy and asked him, could I take his survey? And he said yes. And I asked him his name, and you just asked the first name, and he gave it to me. And I said, what was your background? He said, I was a professor at a college. I said, you're kidding me. And he goes, yeah, I had a PhD and everything. And that was not what I was expecting. What I was expecting was what stereotypically I thought in my head of a homeless person. And then he told me his story of how he'd gotten an illness. He ran through his lifetime benefits of health insurance, and he got evicted from his house, etc. And next thing you know, he's homeless. And so that really was eye-opening for me that, we have stereotypes about what we think and who is in poverty. But a lot of times when we take a closer look, it will surprise us who's there. And it will surprise us sometimes how they got there. And it's not because they're lazy, sorry, or no count. Sometimes it's because of situations like that, which we call situational poverty, or it can be generational poverty, which are people who usually been in generational poverty for at least three generations.
So let's bring it back to the context of this conversation was employment, and our audience is people who hire people. So how does a conversation like this, impact the world of somebody who's trying to hire? And in our context, we're looking for people. There's a shortage of people that we can hire. What's the connection?
The connection is that we'll call it the workplace where an employer has work is a stable environment. And most of these employers, they come from stable socioeconomic groups. But for a lot of the entry level and for a lot of new hires, and then in some jobs, we have employees that are coming from unstable environments. Again, that socioeconomic world of poverty or maybe lower middle class. And so again, there's a merging there of somebody from an unstable environment and somebody from a stable environment. And so for the merging of that would be for somebody to say, I have high turnover and I seem to be it's like repetition. What could I do differently? And the one thing we could do differently is look at through their lens on why are they making those decisions? Why do they not show up for work? What is their world like? If I want some mutual respect, then I need to give some and understand why are they having these unstable environments. And so if you can train frontline management and mid-management on bridges out of poverty strategies, then there can start being mutual relationship built, and you can start seeing how managers now approach these employees instead of just possibly firing them or moving on to the next resume, that they say, how do we solve some of these unstable problems? Say it's transportation. If it's transportation or maybe even childcare, how do we work with them to understand? Because now I see it's not because necessarily they don't want to work or that they're lazy. is that they have real life issues that I'm unfamiliar with, but they experience them every day.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to make that person's life a little more stable in some of those areas and have the potential to do that. And that helps me have less turnover.
Mm-hmm.
And that return on investment can be many-fold.
Oh, absolutely. And I think any hiring manager or business owner can really understand that. A stable workforce pays off quite a bit, and turnover is very costly.
Yes, sir.
So, I can kind of catch the vision here that if we lived in a community where we understood across these bridges that you described,
Mm-hmm.
we had a place where we knew where resources were, that, there's, I think you mentioned maybe 35,000, 37,000, something like that, people in poverty in Smith County.
Mm-hmm.
If that population was able to be a stable workforce, or more stable, that's good for business, that's good for them, that's good for our whole community.
Yes, everybody, it's a win-win-win in that situation. And it can be as simple as we just change our thinking a little bit, because we have become a little bit in society of Einstein's definition of insanity. We keep doing the same things over and over again, especially with the impoverished, and expect a different outcome. And Bridges strategy is maybe something that breaks that paradigm. It's a paradigm shift in from telling them what to do to asking them, how can I help you? What are the barriers that I could possibly help you with? Let's discuss those barriers, and let's see how collectively maybe we can solve those barriers. And once that starts happening, that's where you really start having mutual respect. And that's where you start lowering down some of the defensive nature from an oppressed socioeconomic group to want to now start looking at achievement. I like to describe it sometimes as that if you're asking somebody to climb a mountain and they're climbing that mountain of tyranny every day, and you say, I'm just going to throw you something, I want you to catch it, it's hard for them to let go of that side of that cliff. And so a lot of times it's just, if you trust me though, when I tell you to do that, to catch this, you will. And so we want to stabilize workforces. The first thing we need to look at is, how do we stabilize these employees? And there's tons of resources in Tyler, and there's avenues to do that. We just have to work together and know that they're out there. Things like 903help.org, programs that we offer. And we need to work on those at a community level and not work in silos.
So I know that you and Express, we're talking about how we might be able to bring this concept to businesses at Express, and offer that education to folks. So stay tuned for that. But if somebody listening today would want to take a next step to know more or understand more about bridges of poverty or the things you've talked about, where could we point them?
The best thing to do would be to just go on the East Texas Human Need Network's website. We do our Bridges training. We are the facilitators for Bridges Out of Poverty workshops here. And so we have class schedules. And when we have gaps, or not even gaps, but there's opportunities, we do special requests all the time. We have companies or nonprofits or whatever that call us up and say, we'd like for you to conduct Bridges. Just recently we did all the Cherokee County juvenile probation. They called us and asked us, could we do Bridges Out of Poverty education for all the officers? And we did. So we have regular training schedule, but we also will do it on demand.
Okay. That's great. Well, we'll put that website here in the show notes so that people can follow that. Thank you so much for sharing that. I know that's very impactful for me and for many listening, and I'm hopeful to see how this could be a ripple in our community.
It could be, and I'm impressed with you guys, and I thank Express, because this is how collective impact works and collaboration is. We each see that there's opportunity for us to serve and work together. And when we work together, we can accomplish some big things. So I really appreciate Express interest in this and their desire to help the less fortunate.
Absolutely. All right, Mike, we want to close out with just a few quick kind of fun questions. Okay. Inquiring minds want to know. Do you listen to any podcasts, and what do you like? Yeah,
I listen to some, and I re-listen to one over and over quite a bit. It's by Sir Ken Robinson.
Okay.
It's called How is School Killing Creativity? And I love that one. And basically he talks about how our education system was made that we have right now for the Industrial Revolution, and how it's still stuck in the Industrial Revolution, even though we're in the social media world. So I often listen to that one just because it's so interesting. I like his concepts.
Interesting. Well, going old school here, any books that you're into?
Yeah, I just got through reading a book that I still haven't quite got over. It's called The New Jim Crow, the story of mass incarceration of color blindness.
Wow.
And it's very, very eye-opening read.
Wow. Well, that sounds like a great recommendation. All right. There's this kind of phenomenon, this buzz in the employment world about millennials, and now behind them Gen Z. From your perspective, any advice to people about dealing with different generations?
Yeah, but when I had my active company at Amherst Oil Gas, I mentioned to you I got up to around 600 employees, and majority of them were millennials. Okay, and there's one thing that I noticed about them, and I still notice, and especially even in social services and in the nonprofit sector or volunteerism, is that they're more about action than theory. My generation really likes to debate and talk about it. We will finally get to that point, but millennials really like hands-on. And I always tell people, if we don't solve it now, they will, because they don't wait. And so my strategy and attitude has been with them is to feed them that way, to give them more responsibility, get them more hands-on, let them be at that decision-making table, because they are the future, and it served me well with my company. We accomplished some things that I don't think we could have done without those guys or ladies' engagement. And so I look at that, and every generation that's kind of coming behind them again is more about, let me get my hands on it, and why can't we solve this? And I think that's what we need to do is feed that appetite.
Yeah, leverage that. Absolutely. All right. Well, as you were looking forward to our community and your involvement with the East Texas Human Needs Network, what's your forecast? What's your outlook for our community?
I think that we will continue to become a bridges community. I think as we continue to populate this, our strategies are pretty much proven here, and we have a big collective impact group. We have just recently, moved into Cherokee County. We're about a year there. We're now in Anderson County as well as Rusk County. And so these principles and strategies, as they continue to grow, they really will transform a community. And I can see where, with Tyler kind of being the spearhead of that, that we'll see things and more collaboration, more working together to where we become a true bridges community. And that we'll take down barriers and we'll take down these silos, that have kind of kept us separated and kept us from solving these issues.
That's a great vision. Thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you.
I really
Appreciate
appreciate your opportunity.
Yes, sir.
We look forward to partnering with you in the future.
Me too. Thank you so much.
You bet.